Today I'll be talking about the Shopware PaaS and how you can deploy your application to the Software PaaS. And I'll just go through some of the technical aspects of it. So first of all, whenever you create a project using Shopware PaaS, you would be given access to this console dashboard. So essentially, you'll be using your Shopware credential to log into console.shopware.com. And once you are validated, you will be taken to this home page where essentially all the projects that you have under your organization, they would be showing up over here. So for example, for this purpose of this demo, I have went ahead and created a Shopware 6.4 using the Shopware PaaS template, which relies on Symfony Flex components. And as you can see, it shows up over here. So from here, essentially, you have a couple of filters. If you have projects hosted in multiple regions, then you will be able to filter those projects easily. And the idea here is if you have a large fleet of projects, then essentially all these things will really help you, analyze and, sort out your projects in a much more convenient way. Also, apart from the card view, we also have a list view. And here you will be given an overview of the name of the project, the organization to which that particular project belongs to, the region where that particular project is hosted, and the plan for that particular project. So let me first go inside of my project. So essentially, when you click on this, it will take you to the project main project screen. This is kind of like your project dashboard. And from here, you have complete control over your projects. Essentially, when you create a new project, by default, the plan for that project is at development. So the idea with development plan projects is it helps you quickly, deploy some projects, test them out without necessarily having to pay a higher cost for it. And essentially, when you are ready to deploy your production to your project to a production, essentially you can upscale the project to a more resource intensive kind of a plan. So firstly, when you go inside of your particular project, you can see on top, it'll tell you the project which you are presently viewing. The environment dropdown will show you all the environments that you have pertaining to this particular project. So right now I have only one environment, which is called the main, and it's also the default environment for this particular project. Apart from it, on the left-hand side, on the card view, you'll be able to see the name of the project, the region where that particular project is hosted, the cloud infrastructure on which this particular project is running, and the number of environments that you have for this particular project. So this can be increased or decreased depending upon on your use case. For example, if you have a large project where you need a lot of active environments to handle your development, your staging environments, then definitely you can also have more than 4 environments. But by default, we have 3 development and 1 production, so a total of 4 environments. And also for this particular project, we have allocated 15 GB of storage per environment. So whatever you storage space you see over here, it is on a per environment basis. So your production will have 15 GB, your staging will have 15 GB, your development will have 15 GB, and so on. And also the number of projects who presently have access to this particular project. Since it's my demo project, it shows only 1 user. The other interesting thing is this app and services view. Essentially, this is kind of like a mini map that will show you how your application is connected to the various services and the workers underlying or actually making up this entire project. So for example, the main entry point for this particular project is the router, which handles how your domain and requests are getting served from the application container that you see over here, which is shown as a PHP container. And then this PHP container, which is essentially running our Shopware PaaS application, is in turn connected to a database service, a Redis service, a RabbitMQ service, and an open source service. Now, depending on your project, definitely you can go ahead and add or remove one or more services. I'll go to that as we deep dive into the configuration aspect of it. But this essentially shows you how the containers or the services are connected to your application container. And also we have deployed 2 workers for this particular project. So one is the app queue and the another one is the app schedule task. So this essentially is a high level overview of how your project is working. Obviously, if you click on this, on any of these items, you will see a floating card view over here, in which you can click on this details button, and it will take you to the screen where essentially you'll be able to understand or check the configuration that was presently being used in order to generate this particular project. We'll deep dive into this once I start opening the code base up. But this is kind of all about the overview page. Obviously, you also have a recent view section, which shows you all the actions that have been performed on this particular project. So for example, whenever I push some code to the project repository, it will show you all those kind of events. Whenever there is some ongoing activities that are running, that are going to be shown up in the running section. And obviously, any other activities that are pending to be executed, those are going to be shown up over here. So this gives you kind of like a holistic view of all the actions and activities that have been performed on your project by all the members of your team. Now, the next interesting thing is the metrics section. So this essentially will show you your application resource usage over time. So you have a couple of filters like 15 minutes, 1 hour, and 8 hours. Obviously, since this is a grid project, the time frame for showing this metrics is capped at 8 hours. But for our dedicated projects, which is, you can think of it as a supercharged grid project kind of, it will show you metrics of up to 24 hours. So essentially, the PHP container, which is running our Shopware application, you can see the CPU, RAM, and disk usage for this particular container. Similarly, for the services, you'll also be able to see the CPU and disk usage for all the containers and as well as for the workers. And this will also give you a view of how your various components are performing inside of the project. And if required, you can also use this kind of metrics in order to evaluate whether you need to upscale your project, for more viewership, if I might say. So let's say you have some event coming up for which you think that this present resource size may not be compatible for you, and you might need more resources for some amount of time, then this is a good place which will help you figure that one out. The next tab essentially is the services section. Now, if you remember from the mini map, also you can directly deep dive into this section. But essentially here you'll be able to read the various configurations that make up this particular project. So the starting point, like I said, is the router, which handles how your domain and your routes requests are getting served. So here is the overview that by default, this is the particular domain, that is, it's of type upstream, which means it's going to be serving actively from the container. And for this, we have the HTTP catch as enabled. And similarly, for any HTTP is directly going to get redirected to the HTTPS. We do this by default. You don't need any other additional configuration just to redirect HTTP to HTTPS. And in the next tab, if you look into this, the configuration that you have in the routes.yaml file, this is going to be utilized and shown up over here. Similarly, for your application container, you can have an overview of how your application container looks and a very summarized view of the metrics of your present application container. And similarly, if you go inside of the configuration tab, you'll be able to check out the configuration that is presently being utilized in order to run this particular environment. And similarly for the services, you can also have this kind of a view, and similarly for workers as well. Now, like I said, I'll go into the configuration in a bit when we open up the code base. The next section is backup, and here you can essentially take snapshots of your particular environment. And at a later point of time, if you feel your application is not performing as expected, or let's say you made some changes that you want to roll back, then essentially you will be able to utilize this particular section in order to create a backup. So essentially, you can also use the Shopware CLI, which once again, I'll come to in a bit, but essentially from the web console as well, you can essentially click on this particular button. And if you click on yes, it'll start creating a backup. And like I said, whenever we create any actions in the overview page, you're also going to see that particular activity is being shown over here. And obviously, if you click on this, it will show you a detailed log for that particular action. So the action can be a deployment, the action can be a creating a backup or restoring a backup, so those kind of details you'll also be able to view by clicking on this particular button over here from the overview page. Now, like I said, I only have one particular environment called a main branch. The idea with this is that whenever you create a new project in the Shopware PaaS, the entire project is basically backed by a Git backbone. Now, whatever branches you have in that particular Git repository is used as an environment over here. So for this particular project, I already have a Git repository initialized along with the project whenever we create a new project. And I only have one branch for this, which is the main branch. And that main branch is basically getting directly deployed inside of this console. So if you want to create a new branch, you can basically go and click on this one. Now, like I said, you can use the CLI command as well in order to create it, but you can also create a new branch from here as well. Similarly, if you want to merge multiple branches, you have the option over here. The sync, basically what it does is from a parent to a child environment, it helps you synchronize all the database and the file system that you have into a child branch. So it is mostly useful when you are trying to create a new branch, but you want to take up or use the file system or the data from the parent branch. From this dropdown, you also have the URL from which you'll be able to access this particular site. So this URL is also visible from here. So let's say if I click on this, it is basically an internally generated URL for each of your project environments. And when you click on this, it is basically going to open up this particular website for you that is running inside of that particular environment. So like I said, it's a very simple Shopware demo store. But yeah, it's basically running over here. The SSH dropdown will essentially give you the SSH endpoints that you can use to in order to get inside of your container. If you want to do some management or if you want to check some logs or something like that manually, this is how you can do it. Obviously, there is a much better alternative using the Shopware CLI, which I'll again show you in a while. And going inside of this code dropdown, you will be able to either using Git or using the Shopware CLI, get the code base cloned into your local system. So if you just want to use git clone, then this is basically the command. You can copy on it using this button, or if you are using the Shopware CLI, which we highly encourage you to, you can basically use this particular command in order to get a clone of that particular code base in your system. Now, the next important thing about the web console is basically inside of the settings, where essentially you're able to tweak some of the aspects of your particular project. So starting with the project settings, we have a general section where essentially you'll be able to see the name of the project, the region where that particular project is hosted, and the set time zone for this particular project. You won't be able to change the region. That's presently not possible, but obviously you can go ahead and change the project name and the project time zone from here. The access page helps you get access or add users, to your particular project. So let's say you have if you have multiple developers working in your team, you can enter their email ID over here. You can either give them administrative privilege by checking on this particular box, or you can give them environment type specific access request. So for example, for any project, we have by default 3 types of environments. One is called the production, which is going to be the apex kind of the environment for your particular project. Then we have environments of type staging and environments of type development. So let's say I have a developer, and for production, I don't want to give them any access. For staging, I want to give them only viewer access. And for development type environments, I want to give them contributor access, which means they'll be able to push, pull, all those kind of code. So essentially, this is how you will be able to organize access for each of your team members and give them a granular kind of an access or overview for all of your team members. If you remember, when we go ahead, let's say in a particular environment, and if we try to branch this, you will be able to choose what type of environment this particular, the new environment is supposed to be. Obviously, you can do it from the CLI itself. But like I said, the production environment always is the apex branch or the apex environment of your particular project. And then when you create any sub branches or branches from the main branch, you are obviously able to tag them either as type staging or as type development. So yeah, that's kind of the overview of the access section. Moving into certificates, we by default manage all your HTTPS certificates. Obviously, you can also, be based on your requirement, if there is a stringent requirement of you having to use your own custom certificates, that is also definitely possible. But by default, all our projects come with Let's Encrypt certificates out of the box, which gets automatically, generated and renewed whenever the case arises. So here inside of the certificate tab, you'll be able to get an overview of all the certificates for of this particular project. And then coming to the domain section, like I said, for development plan projects, you won't be able to add any domains. But obviously, if you have a project of a higher plan, then here you will be able to add any project. Let's go ahead and yeah, I'll probably upsize the project in a while and show you how to add a domain. Going to the deploy key, this is where you can add any SSH public key to validate with your private code repositories. So that, let's say during build time, you're trying to fetch some private code repositories which are essential to your project build step, then essentially an SSH key you might want to be utilized in those steps, you can essentially add them up over here. The next section is the integration section. And like I said, whenever you create a new project in the Shopware PaaS, you get a Git backend or rather a Git repository for that particular project out of the box. But you may not want to use that Git repository, and you might have your own repository in some service provider already. So this page essentially helps you in integrate this particular project with your own Git repository. It can be in Bitbucket, you can have your repository in GitHub, it can be in GitLab, or even in enterprise options. Similarly, let's say if you want to integrate a Slack, you're utilizing Slack in your organization and you want a health check notification or any kind of like a custom webhook integration, then basically you can interact and configure all of those things over here. So essentially all your configurations will essentially come inside of this place. By default, we have an integration called the email integration, and this is essentially kind of like a health monitoring kind of an integration, which essentially will send you emails whenever, let's say, your disk storage is running out of space, or your infrastructure has been under tremendous pressure, and the resource allocation is more than 100% for, let's say, 15 minutes. In those kind of situation, all the people who are part of your access gets email, and that particular integration is by default shown over here as the email health check integration. Next thing is the variable section. Now, variables can be of two types. One can be of global variable type. So global variables kind of like they will impact your entire project. And then we also have environment specific variables, which are only accessible for that particular environment should they exist. So it's pretty easy. Let's say you want to create a new environment. You can just go ahead and add the environment variable name. You can enter the value over here. You can check this box if you want that particular variable to be available during runtime, and you can select or deselect this particular box if you also want that variable to be available during the build time for this particular project. And if it's a JSON value, you can essentially check mark this, and if it's a sensitive variable, then you can basically check mark this. So what happens is essentially your variable value won't be shown. It's going to appear as starred out kind of way. Yeah, but this is essentially the variable section. So This project setting section pertains to the global scope of your particular project. Now, we can also have some settings on a per environment basis. So for example, when you go inside environments main, then inside of general, you'll be able to see that the name of this environment is main. This environment is active. You can also inactivate a particular environment. Outgoing emails is on. Essentially, let's say you are doing some load testing or some other tests for your application, and you don't want any outgoing emails to be sent out, then you can essentially just uncheck this particular checkbox, and this will stop any emails from being sent out. Please note, whenever you create a new environment from the main environment, by default, we disable outgoing emails. That is, outgoing emails are set to off automatically. This is done by design because let's say, like we said, that whenever you clone a particular or clone a new environment from a parent environment, the data and the file system, everything is basically used up to create that new particular environment. It might happen that any your particular cron task or a particular worker is active for that child environment, and if it's running in production database, it can send out emails to customers who should not have received that particular email. So that is why, as a security step, by default, when you create a new environment from the main or the Apex environment, we set this outgoing emails to off. Please go ahead and enable this email sending for child environments whenever you're ready. Hide from search engine. This is basically to search. This is basically to let search engines know that, hey, please don't crawl this particular environment or this particular project. And this is done as a preventive measure. You can either enable it or you can disable it. It might not be entirely accurate because, as you can understand, this is only a directive that we set up from our end, and it is up to the crawlers to either respect that or ignore it completely. The next section is the HTTP access control section. So let's say, for example, you want this particular environment to be accessible only when authorized via a credential. So essentially, let's say I can say that let's say login is Ramit, and then I can enter just another random password. So essentially, if I want this particular credentials to be popped out as HTTP authentication, then this can be set up using this particular section over here. Another way you can do it is, let's say for an organization, if you have any internal IP address patterns or internal IP addresses, and you want to restrict access to this particular environment or this particular project only from those particular IP addresses, then you can follow a syntax like this, the IP address followed by deny or allow, and that essentially is going to only allow those particular IP or IP sets to basically be authorized to access this particular environment. So this kind of configurations you'll be able to set up from this particular setting section. And similarly, like I said, variables can either be global. I got locked out. Yeah, sorry about that. And like I said, variables can either be of a global scope or an environment scope. So essentially, for a particular environment, if you want to set up a particular variable, then essentially you can go ahead and add variables over here. It's a similar kind of settings drop down that you have. So essentially, you will have a variable name, you have a value. You can either make it available during runtime and or also during build time. You can mark it as a JSON interpreted value, and you can mark it as sensitive variable as well. And you can either make it inheritable or you can uncheck this box. What happens is, if you make it as inheritable, whenever you create a new environment from this particular environment, that particular variable is also going to get cloned into the new environment. So depending on your use case, a variable, you might want to make it inheritable, or you might want to not make it inheritable, but that option is available over here as well. And yeah, that's kind of the entire overview of the settings section for this particular project. Uh, so yeah, now we can essentially go a little bit into the code base. I'll try to focus more on the infrastructure aspect of it, but yeah. So this is where I basically have my project code base cloned. So uh, let's uh, let's say, yeah, this is basically where my project has been cloned. Now, like I said, you should have the Shopware CLI installed in your system. So essentially, it's a CLI that you can install using the instruction that is available in the Shopware documentation. So it's pretty easy to set it up. You just have to run this curl command, and this will essentially install the Shopware CLI into your system. Let me quickly authenticate myself. Yeah. So yeah, whatever I showed you that we were able to do using the Shopware CLI, you can also go ahead and do all those same things using pretty much the Shopware, the Software CLI. So let's say I go inside my demo project, and let's say I want to get my code base into here. So let me just create a Shopware PaaS demo. So yeah, let's say I want to get my code base cloned into my local system. Obviously, you have the option of using Git, but apart from it, you can also use the Shopware CLI to essentially pull the code base into your local system. So when you run the Shopware get command, it'll ask you which directory you want to clone your particular project in. Obviously, you can go ahead and change that name according to your use case. But obviously, I cloned it into the default repo. And now here I have the particular code that is running for this particular project. Let me make it a little bigger. So yeah, you can essentially see all the files and everything that make up this particular project. Now coming inside of the configuration, let me open this one up in VS Code. That will be better. Yeah, so I opened up the particular project in VS Code, and the starting point of your project configuration resides inside of this directory called .platform. So this is where all your infrastructural configuration of how the infrastructure is built, what are the services that are available for that particular environment, all those kind of things are going to reside in. So firstly, like I said, the routes.yaml is the main entry point for your particular project. So here we have the routes.yaml file. And this particular file, tells the build process how your domain should be handled and what should be done with those particular domains. So just to explain, for example, we have said that HTTPS default. Now, default is the default domain that you have set up in your project settings domain section. And that particular default domain is going to be served as an upstream. And the upstream is going to serve from app HTTP. Now, app is the name of the application container that we have configured inside of applications.yaml. So applications.yaml file essentially informs the platform how it should be built and how it should be deployed. So essentially, you can have multiple applications defined inside of this as well. So the main application, the software application, is defined or aliased as app. So that is why inside of our routes.yaml file, we have said that this particular upstream is going to be served by app and of type HTTP. Now, the default HTTP caching can also be enabled or disabled based on this particular declaration over here. So essentially, this catch key enabled true makes the catch to be enabled. So I can go ahead and say that if I don't want HTTP catch to be enabled, I can just say catch enabled as false. If you want some cookie patterns to be ignored, from the HTTP cache. When the cache obviously is enabled as true, then you can add those up inside of these cookies declaration array as well. And similarly, like I said, you can have multiple patterns as well. So let's say if you want, just for example, let's say if you want to, serve your application from, let's say, shop dot, the domain name. So say the domain name is example.com. So you want shop.example.com to basically serve your particular application. Then in that case, you can also set up some URL patterns like this from the routes.yaml file. So your URL will be example.com, and now the shop.example.com pattern will also be serving requests from upstream app HTTP. This kind of patterns is useful if you want to create a headless project using Shopware, where you have a separate front end and you have the Shopware running as a headless backend. Then definitely this kind of URL patterns you can achieve from inside over here. But yeah, that's kind of the utility of it. Also, let's say if you, by default, if you want to redirect uh, the triple W domain to this one. So you can have a declaration like this, where I'll essentially say that triple W dot default domain will serve as a redirect domain, and this will essentially redirect me directly to here. So what this will do is triple W default will redirect me to the non-triple W domain. So that kind of a redirection also you can set up using this routes.yaml. So yeah, that's kind of the main overview of the routes.yaml file. Now coming to the next interesting file is the services.yaml file. So the services.yaml file declares what services your particular application has, or this particular environment has, and the various configurations pertaining to that particular service. So in this case, let's say we have defined 4 services, as you saw from the minimap. So one of them is the database service, the other one is the Redis service, the third one is a RabbitMQ service, and obviously we have a open search service as well. Now, how do we define these services? Essentially, we say DB. This is kind of like the name of the service that you want to utilize. In this case, I've named it as DB, and it's of type MariaDB. And the version that it is going to use for this particular service is basically 10.6. And we have said that allocate a disk space of 2 GB. So this is in megabytes, essentially. We have allocated a storage space of 2 GB to this particular MariaDB service container. Similarly, we have also defined cache Redis, Redis cache service container, and this is again of type Redis, and the version that it is using is 7. And additionally, you are also able to configure some of the aspects of the Redis. So, for example, if you want to change the max memory policy, let's say to volatile TTL instead of volatile LRU, you are essentially able to do those kind of configuration changes from here as well. So similarly, we have defined another RabbitMQ service that's running version 3.8, and it has a disk space allocated of 1024. And we have an open search service that is running version 1.2, and it has a disk space of 256 MBs. Now, obviously, you can either go ahead and update. So let's say, for example, you want to check let's say Redis 8, for example. So essentially, it's as easy as changing the version number of this service inside of this service configuration file. So let's say I was using, for example, version 7, and I want to upgrade to version 8 to check what impact it has on my particular application. Then it is as easy as changing the version number from 7 to 8. And in the next deployment, when you obviously commit this particular change to the repository and you push that particular change to the project, it is going to use or rather spin up a new Redis 8 container, service container, and use with this particular service. Similarly, if you want to increase or decrease the storage space size, let's say I need more storage space, I want to allocate 4 GB of storage, I can just as well go ahead and update this size over here as well. And similarly, if you want to create a new service, let's say instead of one Redis, I want to have 2 Redis service. So essentially what we can do is we can just go ahead and copy paste this particular configuration. Obviously, this name has to be unique. So I can just, make it a new name. I can either change the version type and any or other configurations that I want to add or, ignore. I can essentially go ahead and make all these changes. So this is how easy it becomes for you to manage, add or remove services for your particular project or each environment. Now, since I am inside of a particular Git branch, I can change the services or the service versions inside of one particular branch without it affecting the services running inside of that other branch. So the entire, my other branches are completely isolated from the changes that I make inside of a particular branch. So this is one of the highly flexible things that this particular platform allows you to do. Coming to the next particular file of it, and probably the most important one where everything comes together, is the applications.yaml file. So like I said, your entire infrastructure configuration, the declarative configuration, is essentially controlled by three files: routes.yaml, services.yaml, and the applications.yaml. Now, the applications.yaml is where everything comes together and entirely builds your particular application. So first of all, we have defined this particular application name as app, and this app name, as you remember, is being utilized in the routing section in order to tell where and how this particular request should be served to. A type declares what kind of project this particular thing is. So this particular project is a PHP project, and the version of PHP that we're running is 8.1. Obviously, like I said, for the services.yaml, let's say tomorrow, if you want to check with PHP version 8.2, it's just as easy as renaming the version number to 8.2, and then in the next subsequent deployment, it is basically going to start using PHP 8.2 instead of 8.1. You can also define a build flavor using the build and the flavor keywords inside of this configuration. And what this basically does is, whenever your container is getting built, by default, it is going to run a composer install for you. So the build flavor, it can be composer, it can be other types as well, like yarn or npm. What it basically does is it automatically injects or executes the default installation command for that particular utility by default. Similarly, inside of dependencies, if you have any dependencies that you want to inject inside of this application container, for example, we want to use Composer version 2, then you can list them inside of this dependencies keyword over here. Now, the next section is the variable section. Like I said, you are able to define variables from inside of your project console by going inside of settings and then variable. But if you want, you can also have some variables defined or declared directly inside of applications.yaml. So for example, we have defined a variable called app environment and set it as prod. So whenever this deployment happens, is going to take or rather read the environment as a production environment. You can add instance ID, Shopware HTTP catch enabled. So all these kind of Shopware, variables or any other PHP or other variables, you can also have them configured inside of this variables declaration over here. Similarly, apart from the environment variables, you can also change how your PHP is working by tweaking some or all of its defaults that come out of the box. So for example, let's say if you want to change the upload max size, if you want to change the post max size, or you want to increase or decrease the memory limit, disable assert active, or tweak some aspects of the opcatch behavior, then obviously inside of this variable section, you can define another section called PHP, and there you can essentially add up all these kind of declarations as well. So that's all about the variable block, which essentially helps you configure variables and PHP aspects. Runtime extension, any runtime extension that you want to add or enable for this particular application container, you can go ahead and add them as a list over here inside of this extension section. Now coming to the most important section of this particular file is basically the hooks. Now hooks are essentially declare how your particular application will get built, deployed, and what should happen during that particular building or the deployment phase. So for the first step is basically your build step. Then we have a deploy step, and obviously we have another post deploy hook as well. So during the build step, what happens is it starts installing all the required dependencies for your particular application container. Obviously, if you remember, since we have defined the build flavor as composer, composer install is going to happen out of the box. But any other build step or installation step that you need to do for your particular application container, that needs to be defined over here. So it can be, unsetting some of the variables, exporting some NVM directories. Obviously, with the Shopware PaaS template, we already have, the best defaults already written inside of over here. So you'll only need to modify some or, some of these instructions based on your particular application need. But this is what basically is happening on a high level. It's basically installing Node.js for this particular container. It's checking whether NVM is available, and if not, it's loading and if available, it's loading the correct version of it. It's disabling the UI installer, and it's running, it's compiling the theme and saving the configuration. So this is what's essentially happening as a part of the build step. Now, the deploy step is the next step of your, the build and deploy process. What happens during this step is essentially we are preparing your application to start handling active requests from the users. So the build step was more like the preparation phase for your application container, rather, or very simply put, the installation phase. And now the deployment phase is we are preparing, the application or getting things ready for it to, start behaving properly and start serving requests from end user. So here also, based on the Shopware PaaS template, we have some of the good defaults that are already set. But like I said, you can obviously go ahead and add or remove any instructions over here as seen fit for your particular use case. But on a high level, we are basically restoring the theme config. We are restoring the plugin config to the mount, and also we are checking if Shopware is already installed. If not, it is going to run some commands like bin console system install and generate the theme and then dump the theme. All those kind of things. And if it is already installed, then essentially it's going to do some other stuff like exporting the front end URLs and things like it. Obviously, it's also going to try and run the database migrations that you have for your particular project. And you can also have any custom shell script present inside of your repository. And if you want, you can essentially execute those shell script as well. Now, the utility for this is you might want to do some custom things over here. And for that, you instead of writing the instructions directly inside of this hook, you can add the instructions inside of a shell script and commit that particular shell script as a part of your repository. And inside of this, either the build or the deploy hook, you can essentially invoke those shell scripts. Similarly, the last step is basically to set up the Fastly CDN layer for your particular project. Now, based on whether or not you have Fastly enabled, we highly encourage you to have Fastly CDN enabled for your particular project, because it will help you accelerate the response time for cached content from your particular application. And it also helps reduce significantly the amount of load that happens for your on your origin. So platform Shopware PaaS basically comes with Fastly configurations out of the box. So it automatically will essentially set up all the required VCL and the configurations for you inside of Fastly. So you don't need to do anything manually. Obviously, like I said, this entire configuration is configurable. So at any point of time, if you want to add any other instructions, or if you want to tweak some aspects of it, like let's say you want to add some custom VCLs and you want them to be deployed automatically to your Fastly setup or Fastly service, then obviously you can follow an approach similar to this, either manually or by using a bash script. But this essentially is the main purpose of the build and the deploy hook. Now, now coming to the next section, is essentially the relationship. And like I said, we had defined our services inside of services.yaml file. And here what we are doing is inside of this applications.yaml file, we are connecting or binding those particular services defined inside of services.yaml to our application. So this is kind of like the mapping of how it is. So the database keyword is going to be accessible as DB, and it's a service of type MySQL. Similarly, the application will be able to read or reach the Redis service using the keyword Redis catch. And the service that we are utilizing for this is basically this catch Redis service that we have defined over here. And the type of the service is Redis. Similarly, for RabbitMQ, the service is RabbitMQ, and it's obviously type RabbitMQ. And similarly, we have OpenSearch as well, which is OpenSearch. And this is how you essentially will be binding all your relationships to the services.yaml. Now, the next thing that I would like to discuss about is disk. Like you remember, for services.yaml, we had mentioned that you can set up or allocate a certain amount of disk space for each of these particular services. So similarly, for your application container, you can use the disk keyword in order to allocate a certain amount of disk storage space to this particular application. So this is the size of the persistent disk for your application container. Coming to the mount points, this essentially are the writable mount points or directories for your particular application container. And the idea here is that as a security measure, once your container is built, the file system becomes read-only. So unless and until you define the directories, as mounts inside of this particular declarative section, you will not be able to write files to, write data, write files to it during the runtime. So this is done mainly from a security perspective, because during runtime, we don't want any unexpected changes to be made to your files. So that is why once your application container is built, the entire file system, except for the mount points that you have declared inside over here, are basically going to be writable mounts. Everything else is read-only. So yeah, here it's pretty simple. We need a writable place for our files directory. So essentially, you can define a mount for the files, and the source is local. And obviously, the source path is where the actual file path or the directory path resides, and that is essentially files. Similarly, for public's theme, this directory, the source path for this is going to be public theme, and it's also source local. Now, since this is a great project, most of the sources are going to be local. But like I said, for our dedicated offerings, if you're deploying the project to our dedicated infrastructure where there are multiple nodes running your particular environment, then you can either have these as local, which means this particular directory is going to be configured on a per node basis, or you can also have them defined as a local store, as a network storage. So it's kind of think of it like a common storage place where all your nodes can access, read, and write at the same time. So this is how this source keyword is essentially utilized in order to configure what kind of a mount point this particular is. Obviously, like I said, for grid, local is the only thing, but obviously for multi-node clusters, you can either have them as local, which means per node, or you can have them as shared, which is essentially a network storage. But yeah, that's kind of how you would be defining all the required mount points for your particular application. Obviously, based on your use case, you might need some more directories to be writable. Just copy paste one of these configurations and modify it according to your requirement, and those will be writable post the deployment of this particular application container. Similarly, for the web locations, this is the configuration for the web for the app when it is exposed to the web. So by default, slash or the root is going to be of the public directory, and it is going to route all the requests through index.php, and it's going to expire in 24 hours. And if you want certain access rights to be applied to it, so for example, I can only access CSS, JS, GIF, and so on and so forth, other kind of file types. That is, I'm restricting PHP files to be directly read from this particular location. Then obviously all those kind of rule sets you can add inside of this declaration as well. Coming to the next section, which is essentially worker, and your application might require multiple workers. So one or more workers might be required. And essentially this worker keyword is where you would be creating and declaring each of those particular workers. So for example, we have a worker called Q, and we have allocated a disk space of 128 megabytes to it. And the command for that to start is basically bin console message consume default, and obviously any other optional parameters like memory limit that you want to allocate for that particular command. Basically, we have mentioned them over here. But this is essentially the declaration of a single worker. Similarly, we have declared another worker called the schedule task, and this essentially is going to use bin console to execute the schedule task run. And obviously, we have also added a memory limit using the optional parameters over here. Like I said, it's very easy to add or remove any other service workers. Let's say if you need any other service worker, obviously this name needs to be unique. You can just copy paste one of these configurations. You can modify the disk space based on what's your requirement. And yeah, that's kind of how you would declare a new service worker for you. Yeah, and that's kind of all the things that we have done, or rather the configurations, obviously, for how your application is built, deployed, and the services, how you would be configuring it and controlling it using these 3 configuration files. And apart from it, obviously, you have the entire code base here as well, like you would for any other project. But yeah, that's in essence how you would be configuring this particular platform environment for your project. So I think we made some changes. Yeah, so we made some changes to routes.yaml. Let me quickly check. Yeah, looks good. And to services.yaml, I think I added some spaces. Yeah, so let's say when you are ready to commit some of these changes, you can just go ahead and run the, using Git, you can just commit this particular changes. So I'm saying Git commit, updating config, and I can run Git push. So as soon as I push these changes, it's going to start validating my configuration changes, because my configuration changes may not be correct. So it validates first your configuration files, and in case there is any error in your configuration file, it's going to alert you directly over here. And then it is going to start the deployment for this particular project. So as you can see here, it states that I have pushed right now a code directly to the main branch. And clicking on this, you'll be able to see the build log for it as well. Obviously, when you are doing a git push, that same thing will also be you'll also be able to see in the terminal as well, and as well as inside of the web console. So you have the option of seeing it in both places. Let's give it a second. So yeah, the deployment and the build is done. And as a last step, it's going to open this particular environment, and it'll tell you what are the URLs that are presently enabled for your particular application. And if you remember, we added the www.default redirect. So here it is stating that www. The domain is going to get redirected to HTTPS, this one, and that in turn will also get redirected to the non-www domain. So if I click on the www domain now, it should redirect me to the non-www domain. Yeah. So yeah, this is how your application gets built and deployed. Obviously, a lot more of these details are already mentioned inside of the Shopware documentation that you can read up on. But yeah, this is an overview of the configuration files. Now, the next interesting thing, or part of the interesting thing, is essentially the software CLI. and what it enables you to do. So like I said, the Shopware CLI can be installed using the PHP command that you see in the documentation. Running Shopware will essentially ask you to log in if you are not already logged in to that particular account in your local system. But essentially, once you are validated, you will be able to see an overview of this particular project if you are inside of the project directory and run just the Shopware command. But it also has a lot of other cool functionalities. So for example, like I said, we have our application container and we have some services here as well. Now, let's say I want to SSH inside of my application container. So the easiest way to do is using the Shopware CLI. So I can just run Shopware SSH, and when I run Shopware SSH, it is going to detect which environment I am inside in. So since I am inside of my project repository and I am inside of the Git branch main, so it knows that by default running Shopware SSH means I want to SSH into the containers that are running inside of the main environment. And then it gives me a choice of which container I want to go into. So do I want to go inside my worker containers, or I want to go inside my application container? So if I choose 0, I will be taken inside my particular application container. So, so yeah, here we are. So this essentially is our application container that's running in the main branch of project ID this. Yeah, you can then go ahead and, I don't know, just let's say bin console catch clear. If you just want to run any command, for example, you're debugging something, or you want to manually run some commands, or if you want to read the logs or something like that, obviously you get the idea. You can then just run them directly inside of this SSH container. Obviously, you can also instead of writing so much, you can just say Shopware SSH. So I want to SSH inside my containers, and using the command -a, you can say that I directly want to go inside my application container. And if you just want to directly run or execute some command, then you can just type those commands over here as well. So in one step, it'll directly SSH inside of the application container, and it'll execute this particular command for you. So yeah, these kind of things you are able to directly do inside of using the Shopware CLI without having to manually manage a lot of SSH keys and other related configurations on your end. Similarly, if you want to create a backup, I showed you how to create a backup from the web console. But similarly, if you want to get a list of all the backups for you for this particular project, you can run backup list. And if you remember at the start of the demonstration, I had executed a backup. So this is the backup that you see over here. Obviously, if you want, you can also create a new backup directly using the CLI. And that essentially will trigger the process of creating new backup. And as you can see, it also that particular event also shows up inside of your web console. And yeah, I can just Control C. I didn't want to, but yeah, this is going to keep running. I just ended the live checking. The next thing that you might want to do, yeah, is let's say if you want to open some tunnel connection from your containers to your local system, then you can use the tunnel command. So let's say I want to open some tunnel connections to directly access the services from my local system. So I can use the Shopware tunnel open command to essentially get that done. So I said Shopware tunnel open, and now it has opened some tunnel connections to the services that are running inside my main environment to my local system. And then in my local system, obviously, I can go ahead and use these entry points in order to read the data from that particular service. Also, once you're done with this particular tunnel connection, you can just go ahead and say tunnel close, and it will essentially close all the active tunnel connections to your particular system. So yeah, this is really helpful if you want to get a hold of the live data, or you want to do some active changes to your database. container, for example, or database service rather. Yeah, so any debugging or any data access you want to directly do to a particular environment, obviously you have to be authorized to do this, but if you are part of the project, if you have access to the particular project, then using the Shopware CLI, you are able to achieve it very useful, very easily. Now, yeah, handling of mount points. You can also download or upload your mount point files from local to the server using this particular command. So let's say after you set up the Shopware PaaS template, if you want to download the mount point files to your local project repository or local file system, then essentially you can use this command Shopware mount download and -f mount points to where this particular file should be downloaded, and the target is where those files reside. So if I can hit on this, it will essentially ask me to confirm whether I want to do them or not. And it's going to read all those files directly from the container, and it's going to copy them inside of my local system as well. So the Shopware, sorry, so the Shopware mount commands essentially help you do all this configuration things. And similarly, if you want to check how much of the mount storage space you have utilized, then you have the command called Shopware mount size, and that will give you a rough idea of how much storage space you have allocated and how much of that storage space you are basically utilizing. And yeah, apart from it, like I said, Shopware has the Shopware CLI has a lot of other commands. To be honest, lot more to go through than in one demo session. For example, it can help you, get all the activity logs for your particular system. It can help you get all the certificate details of your particular system or environment. You can also environment branch. So let's say I'm right now in the main environment branch, and I want to create a child environment, let's call stage, where I want to create a new environment, essentially stage, from the environment called main. Then essentially I can use the environment branch command from the Shopware CLI. And like I mentioned towards the beginning of the demo, what this will do is essentially it's going to take a snapshot from the parent environment, which is main, and then it is going to utilize that particular snapshot in order to create a new environment called stage inside of my particular project. So if you go inside over here, you will be able to see that now I have again created a branch called stage from main. And now instead of showing one environment, it's showing that I have two environments. And here also that particular detail has been updated. And obviously that particular deployment process is basically running over here. You can check it over here, and also you can check the same thing from over here as well. And here it is creating a temporary backup of the parent environment in order to use that to set up the child environment. Very helpful if you want to spin up new environments using the existing data of a parent environment. Yeah, I'll keep that, allow it to run over here. And meanwhile, we can have a quick look on the other commands as well. Similarly, the domain list is going to show you the list of all the domains for your particular configured for your particular project. You can add the domain add command in order to add one or more domains to this particular project directly from the CLI itself. You can also use the domain delete to remove one or more domains, for it. Similarly, the db dump is going to help you, take a database snapshot or a db.sql backup and get it on your system, those kind of things. The app list will show you a list of all the applications that you have for this particular project. Similarly, you can also get the log files using the Shopware log command over here. And similarly, if you want to, let's say, directly go inside your SQL service container, then you can just directly say Shopware SQL. And what that is going to do is it's going to ask you which command you're going to go into. I think there is some issue with my login process, but anyways, you will be able to directly log in over here as well. So yeah, I'll let it deploy. Obviously, I think I'll need to set up some of the theme files and other configuration for this new environment, but I can at least show you that it's up and running. The deployment is still running, but yeah, that's kind of